Hello, Year 9, and welcome to another English lesson. This term we've been looking at Of Mice and Men, and in the last two lessons, you guys have been studying what has happened in the US and what is happening in the US in terms of the racial riots and protests surrounding the death of George Floyd. I would like to now bring in a literary or literature element to the work that you guys are doing. And in this lesson, we're going to be looking at a poem, and in our next lesson, we're going to be looking at an extract from a book. And you can see from this image on the first slide that we have that we've got some lines from the poem that we're going to be looking at. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. And that's by Maya Angelou. And we're going to be looking at Maya Angelou's life, and we're going to be looking at her her poem I Rise. Still I Rise, actually, is what it's called, today. What I would like you to do during this lesson is I would like you to do three things primarily. They are read. You're going to be doing some reading this lesson. They are listening. You're going to listen to what I have to say. You're going to listen to Maya Angelou. And thinking. Reading, listening, and thinking are the three main things you're going to be doing today. Okay? I will be asking you to make some notes. Write down your thoughts. Write down your ideas. But the key aspect of today's learning is some thinking. Okay, a lot of you may be starting to think, well, I can see that it's a terrible thing what's happened in the United States, and the death of George Floyd is tragic, and I think we would all agree that it is tragic, and hopefully the policeman who killed him will be feeling the full force of American justice. But what I don't want you to think is, what has that got to do with me? I would like you to think about your world, the world that you live in, the people that you surround yourselves with, the people that you go to school with, all the rest of that kind of stuff. And try and make what has happened a little bit more relevant to you. Okay, so let's go on to the poem now. This new image on the screen is Maya Angelou, and we are going to be looking at Still I Rise. So you can use that as your title for today's lesson. Okay, right. Excuse me, or hiccups there. Write down the title Still I Rise and the name of the poet Maya Angelou. Okay, so first of all, we need to talk about racism. What I would like you to do is I would like you to write down your definition of the word racism. What do you think this means? What does it mean to you? Imagine a younger brother and sister heard this word and thought, what is that? What is a racist? What is racism? Write down your own definition of the word, please. You can pause this video and do that now. Okay, so you should now have your own definition of this word. Okay, we've been doing a lot of study on racism this term. We looked at Of Mice and Men, and that has racism as one of the key themes. The character of Crooks, in particular, is separated, segregated from the rest of the men on the ranch due to the color of his skin. And in chapter 4 of the novel, he goes through how he feels about that. But we now need to start to think about racism in a more modern day context, I would imagine. Okay, so many of us have the luxury of learning about racism and not living it. However, we can make sure that we are playing our part, and one of the ways we can do this is by reading literature, fiction and non-fiction written by black authors. And so that's a very key idea, especially for an English teacher, to have that. I don't understand the black experience in the United States or in the UK, but a great way of me learning a little bit more is by reading what black people have to say. And those of you that have been in my class will know one of my favourite novels is a novel called White Teeth by Zadie Smith. I speak about it very often. And that's just reading that book is one way of me getting an understanding of hearing black voices. Okay. Another way for me to do that is to read non-fiction, to read essays and articles by black writers and black authors. I am not professing to know everything about the black experience. I am professing to say I don't know enough and I need to educate myself. And actually, we all do. Even if you feel like you know everything, you really don't. Nobody does. Okay, and I do quite like this image here. Until you fix it here and address it here, nothing changes here. So until you change your heart, until you change how you feel, and you address it in your local area, your home, we won't be able to change the world. I think that's a key message to have. Okay, so we're going to now look at this author and we're going to look at her poem. Who is Maya Angelou? Have you ever heard of her before? You might have read some of her poems in English. You might have read one of her books or one of her poems outside of the English classroom. Maya Angelou was a poet and activist. She was born in 1928 and she died in 2014, 6 years ago. And she's known as Maya Angelou, although her name is Marguerite Annie Johnson Angelou. American author, actress, screenwriter, dancer, poet, civil rights activist, best known for her 1969 memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And that was the first non-fiction bestseller by an African-American woman. So she really was a bit of a trailblazer. She was an author that broke new ground for African-Americans and in particular African-American women. She spent about 5 years in silence as a form of protest. She wrote 36 books. She published cookbooks. She was the first black San Francisco cable car conductor, and she recited a poem at the President Bill Clinton's inauguration. And one of her famous quotations is, "If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude." And that kind of links into what we were saying about until you fix it here and address it here, nothing changes here. We need to change our own viewpoint before we can change the world. I am not going to alone eradicate racism from the world. However, what I can do, and I have a privilege to do, is to change my own opinion, to understand that I don't know everything and to educate myself, and then to challenge the opinions and viewpoints of others. And that's what Maya Angelou professed. Okay, so now I would like you to think about your story. We've just gone through Maya Angelou's life, okay, very, very briefly with a few quick facts. I want you to think about your story. If you were to write an autobiography, what would you title it? For example, if I were to write an autobiography, I identify myself as a teacher. I might call it Lessons in Learning, for example. That's a bit rubbish. It was just off the top of my head. But it just kind of encapsulates the teachery aspect of me and my personality. So I would like you now just to pause this video and think, if you were to write an autobiography, a story of your life, what would you title it? Maybe use a pun on your name. maybe you could kind of think about a theme or something that is very, very strong to you and write about that. I'm not asking you to write your story, just type the title of your autobiography. Pause the video now, write down that title. Off you go. Okay, we're going to move on. So, Maya Angelou's, as I mentioned earlier, her memoir, which is another word for an autobiography, is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Okay. And what I want you to do now is think about this and read this. Why do you think Maya Angelou has titled her autobiography in this way? Have a think about that. We can read this bit of text underneath. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings is a 1969 autobiography describing the early years of an American writer and poet, Maya Angelou. The first in a 7-volume series, it is the coming-of-age story that illustrates how the strength of character and a love of literature can help overcome racism and trauma. The book begins with 3-year-old Maya and her older brother are sent to Stamps, Arkansas to live with their grandmother, and ends when Maya becomes a mother at the age of 16. In the course of Caged Bird, Maya transforms from a victim of racism with an inferiority complex into a self-possessed, dignified young woman capable of responding to prejudice. So you might want to think about, well, she's probably thought about being a caged bird as a metaphor for herself. She felt like she wasn't free. She, as we know, she didn't speak for a number of years, and so that idea of singing, of finding your voice as a way of expressing yourself and becoming more free, might be to do with why she titled her autobiography in this way. Okay, we're going to move on now. We're going to look at the key themes in the poem. I would like you to now print off a copy of the poem. There is a document that's attached to the Show My Homework assignment that I would like you to print off. If you don't have a printer or if you don't want to print, then I would like you to save that copy of the poem and onto your computer and add to it with your own annotations on your computer. Okay. As we go through the poem, I would like you to just write down where you think we can see the key themes of politics, history, oppression, societal issues, so that's issues within society, individual rights, slavery, and peaceful protest. Okay, lots of these themes, as we can see, are around the news right now, especially in terms of what is happening in the United States. And as you go through the poem, just write down some ideas or label where you can see these themes being explored within the poem. Okay, let's start. Hopefully by the end of this this lesson, you're going to understand the way the background to a text shapes its meaning. Hopefully you'll be able to identify and analyze some of the imagery, and you'll be able to understand how a poem is structured and shaped and how it contributes to meaning. So I'm going to be going through the poem. But before I do, I would like you to read through the poem once in your head, and then I would like you to read through the poem out loud. Pause this video and do that now. Okay, so we are now going to look at an overview of the poem. It's a stirring poem packed full of figurative language. It functions as sort of a secular hymn to the oppressed and abused. The word secular there means not connected to religion. So it sounds like a hymn, but there's no real link to religion. The message is loud and clear. No matter the cruelty, regardless of method and circumstance, the victim will rise up. The slave will overcome adversity. Okay. And it is little wonder that Nelson Mandela read this poem in his inauguration in 1994, having spent 27 years in prison. Although written with black slavery and civil rights issues in mind, Still I Rise is universal in its appeal. Okay? Any innocent individual, any minority, or any nation subject to oppression or abuse could understand the underlying theme. Don't give in to torture, bullying, humiliation, and injustice. And actually, those things are things that will have happened in your lives. You will have seen bullies go about their business. You will maybe have been bullied yourselves. You may have been treated in a way that you feel is unfair or is not justified. Okay? And so don't just think of this in terms of racial injustice. This poem is about injustice in general. And so that's how we can make it relevant to our lives. This poem offers an intriguing mixture of tones. It's playful and defiant, it's comical and it's angry, it's self-assured and it's bitter. And the poem's tone ultimately, as the work title suggests, is triumphant. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to listen to Maya Angelou reading her own poem. Here we go. Let me just put the volume up so we can see it.
In history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust. Does my chastening perfection, why are you protected from me? Because I walk as if I have oil wells accompanying my living wings. Like moons and like suns with the certainty of time. Just like hope springing high. Still I lie. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cry. Does my sentiment affect you? Don't take it so hard, just take I laugh, as if I have gold mines sticking in my own backyard. You can shoot me with your words, you can cut me with your knife. You can kill me with your hatefulness, but just not life. Let my sexiness offend you. Now this comes as a surprise, and as if I have diamonds at the meeting of my time. Out of a lust of mystery shame, I rise. Up from a past rooted in pain, I rise. A black ocean seizing and wide, welling and swelling and bearing in time. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daylight miraculously clear, bringing the gift that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave. And
Okay, so that was Maya Angelou reading her poem, and there's certainly a performance element that she is an actress. You can see that she is a dancer. There is really that performance that she brings into it. How do you feel about listening after listening to her? I certainly, when I read the poem, uh, I feel that triumphant nature coming through, but there really is that kind of comical, um, uh, dramatic aspect to it when she performs it herself. Okay, so we're going to do some analysis now. We're going to go through section by section, and I'm going to talk you through some of my notes on the poem. Okay, so
I want you to think about this. What do you notice about these lines? You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I rise. Stanza 1. So in this stanza, Maya Angelou gives of her heart and her soul to Claire that nothing and no one can oppress her or keep her down. We've got that first word, that personal pronoun, you. It's really significant. It addresses those who oppress her specifically and the black people in general. Okay? It's highly significant that the first kind of oppression the speaker mentions is an oppression rooted in writing. The poem itself is a direct response to this kind of oppressive writing. The speaker transforms writing, one of the most important means of domination, into an instrument of liberation. There is the anaphora, okay, where we've got that repetition of the word you. The word you may indicates that Angelou cannot stop it happening, so instead she focuses on herself and rising out of conflict. So you've got that you may, that anaphora, that repetition of a particular phrase all the time, saying that you might do this, but I'm still going to rise. I'm still going to be triumphant. We have a technique of assonance. Okay, assonance is a repetition of vowel sounds in the same line as the sound I, with your bitter, twisted lies. With your bitter, twisted lies. That's assonance. Okay, it is not alliteration. Okay. Well, it is alliteration, but assonance is a form of alliteration there. Okay, and in the third line, we reach the first reference to actual physical oppression. Okay, the phrasing is a little bit more metaphorical. Metaphorically, to tread another person in the dirt is to treat a person with enormous disrespect, almost shocking violence, and that word dirt suggests a lower level in society. No sooner does the speaker imagine being abused in this way than she immediately responds with the simile, but still like dust I rise. The rhyming of lies and rise further adds to the sense of triumph. Okay, so dirt turns into dust and dust just rises up into the air. Okay, next stanza. What do you notice about these lines? Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. This would be a much less effective poem if its tone were entirely angry and bitter. Instead, Angelou injects plenty of sarcastic humour into the work, and certainly when we saw that performance that she did, there was a lot of that sassiness, that sarcasm that she's going through. So Angelou asked two rhetorical questions here, okay, one after the other. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? If someone is sassy, it means that they are lively and spirited. Clearly her boldness makes others feel uncomfortable. But Angelou doesn't care about this. She doesn't care if she's upsetting people. She knows that she has succeeded in her life, okay, in her writing as a woman, and this simile of oil wells suggests that the hatred she receives fuels her. Okay, not only does oil give you wealth, but it gives you fuel. It gives you energy to move. We use oil to create that energy to move forward, and so there is almost a double meaning there of the use of that metaphor. That oil well shows two different things. It shows wealth, maybe not materialistic wealth, but maybe a wealth of spirit, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of determination and drive, but also that oil gives a sense of drive, a sense of forward moving. What do you notice about these lines? Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Angelou uses this imagery relating to nature to to demonstrate her power. So, first thing we can see that multiple similes compare herself to the moon, the suns, as they are affected by the tides. This gives the reader an understanding that the speaker has no other choice but to rise up out of her affliction. Try as society might to keep her oppressed, it is her nature to rise up and stand against oppression, just as it's the nature of the tides to respond to the moon. And also, with this, the moons and the sun are constants. They rise every day. They rise whether they like it or not. Whatever goes on in the world, the moon and the sun will rise. And so that idea of never changing, I'm not going to be changed by you, is suggested within this use of simile. We've also got this refrain of the poem, I'll rise, coming through again and again. It's repeated here again to demonstrate her resilience. This is further emphasized by the use of sibilants, that repetition of S sounds. So, just like the moons and the suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I rise. And that sibilance is a repetition of S or sh sounds, gives that sense of resilience, of carrying on forward. And actually, just listening to myself read that there's almost a tidal way of the sounds that are created there by the S's. That okay, what do you notice on these lines? Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Okay, so she knows that her own success is received with bitterness by the racist people in her society, so she directs these questions at society, and she directs it at the society that has long tried to keep her oppressed. She asks them if she wants to see her broken, oppressed, depressed and bitter. She asks these questions knowing that this is indeed what many in society wanted. They didn't want to see a black woman rise up out of oppression of her society and succeed. The speaker knows this, and she draws attention to it with these revealing yet cutting questions. I do apologise, I've written this revealing yet cutting questions when I should have written these. The simile of teardrops illustrates how Angelou is choosing resilience rather than allowing others to accept her. Shoulders falling down like teardrops. What do you notice about these lines? Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got old mines digging in my own backyard. Does haughtiness offend you? This fifth stanza is a lot like the second stanza in the form and the content that it takes, although it only contains one rhetorical question rather than two. Angelou wonders if her haughtiness, is basically her pride, offends her oppressor. If it does, she advises flippantly to her oppressor they should not be try not to be too negatively affected. Don't take it awful hard. In an echo of the simile in the second stanza by oil wells, the speaker states that she laughs as if she's got gold mines in her backyard. Just as oil wells are busy pumping and producing oil, so too are those gold mines producing digging gold, a valuable and beautiful commodity. The very act of her laughter is an act of resistance and defiance against her oppressor's hatred. And finally, we've got these plosives here. Sounds in the stanza as well as the guttural G sound. So again, we're looking not just at the words, but how the words sound when they're spoken. This is why I asked you to read it aloud earlier. It's very, very important when you read poems to read them aloud, to start to listen to the sounds that they create when spoken. The forcefulness of the language mirrors Angelou's defiance in the face of those who stand in judgment of against her, especially when we've got these, 'cause I laugh like I got gold mines digging in my own backyard. So we've got this kind of, it's almost like a thud as it hits That sounds got gold mines digging in my own backyard. Those plosives and guttural sounds, very, very important, very forceful there. What do you notice about these lines? You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I rise. You'll notice that this is the stanza that I started the lesson off with at the start of the lesson. Here we see Angelou focusing on the violence of language by using three metaphors: shoot me, cut me, kill me. Okay, the oppressor's hatefulness could literally kill her, but in this line the speaker speaks of death metaphorically. The oppressor's hate towards her might kill her spirit, but she will still rise above the pain. And this stanza concludes with the simile of her being like air, which will always rise. It cannot be held down. And what do you notice about these lines? Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? We return to rhetorical questions. The speaker's asking if her sexiness or her sex appeal upsets other people. A clear escalation of value from the oil wells and the gold mines of stanzas 2 and 5. The escalation marks an intensification of Angelou's value and worth as the poem progresses. The plosive alliteration of dance and diamonds further links these two images together. Okay, I dance like I've got diamonds. And in the previous stanzas, the high value commodities of oil and gold were located in her house, her living room and her backyard. But here the diamonds are embedded in her own body. Her value and her worth, the speaker implies, are inherent to herself and inherent to her sexuality. It's not a coincidence that she uses the meeting of her thighs, that reference to her own sexuality and her own feeling of sexiness when it comes to. I'm sorry if some of this embarrasses some of you, but it's certainly something that Angelou is trying to say about a person, and in particular a woman's own sexual identity or her own sense of sexuality. Additionally, the sexual evocative placement of the diamonds, this is the point I've just made. In this context, the line is reclamation of black femininity and womanhood. Additionally, at the height of 8, at the age of 8, when living with her mother, Angelou was sexually abused and raped by her mother's boyfriend. Here, her sexuality is a source of pride and not shame. She is taking ownership of her own body. Okay, so having that context and having that understanding of Angelou's background gives us a little bit of understanding of these lines, not just in general terms, but in terms of what she's personally saying about the world and about any oppressors or anyone who want to oppress her own body. What do you notice about these lines? Out of the huts of history's shame I rise, up from a past that's rooted in pain I rise. I am a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide. Okay, so we've got lots to talk about here. In the first two lines, Angelou rises from the huts of history's shame. Huts are small, crude shelters as a reference to poor housing conditions of enslaved peoples on plantations. It might also be a reference to Africa. History's shame is also a reference to slavery, as the practice of slavery is a shameful mark on human history. Thus, the first two lines are both an acknowledgement of the past as well as an assertion of the speaker's rise above the attempt to dehumanize her and other black people. Okay? And these last two lines of the stanza are joyous and fantastical. Through this metaphor, I am a black ocean, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Angelou declares that she's a black ocean. The comma after black ocean marks a caesura, which is a kind of a pause in the middle of a line of a poetry. I am a black ocean, leaping and wide. Asks readers to pause and reflect on the blackness of the ocean. By describing the ocean, a powerful force of nature, as black, Angelou asserts her power is inherent in and inextricably linked to her blackness. Moreover, this ocean spans both heights and vast distances. The ocean is a powerful force of nature that cannot be tamed by human beings. And actually, I think, just thinking about it, that black ocean suggests the number of black people. It is not just her, it's not just the I in I rise, it is almost a we. Okay, it gives that sense not just of power in the individual, but power in the numbers, the black nation. And this internal rhyming of welling and swelling complements the imagery. Finally, Angelou asserts that she carries in the tide. A tide and other oceanic movements can be used to describe social movements. First wave feminism. You could say that there is a wave of anger right now in America after the death of George Floyd. A lot of time when there are social movements, when there are changes in the world or anger in the world, it's described using that imagery of waves. The tide that Angelou brings forth to the world is empowerment of marginalised people, specifically black people. And we have these lines: leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. Okay, so we've got here Angelou alluding to slavery. Once again, the nights of terror and fear. She won't forget it. It's something that she's determined to leave behind. We've got Angelou clearly envisioning the light and hope of her present and her future, and it's a metaphor of possibility. We have this I rise being repeated more frequently, and it actually adds to some momentum in the poem. And we have final assertion of Angelou's value and power, which are linked to her ancestors and the oppressed people of the past. Angelou's personal strength and her body are possible because of her ancestors who survived and eventually created her. In a sense, her ancestors gifted her with who she is today. The words gift and gave are alliterative. There's alliteration there, adding emphasis to the words and highlighting the importance of both the gift and the act of giving from her ancestors. Angelou has a clear sense of gratitude towards her ancestors who survived through the pain, terror and fear of the past in order to give her life. And then you've got these last three lines: I rise, I rise, I rise, full stop. And the end of the poem is triumphant. It leaves behind everything. The last three lines repeat the poem's transformation refrain, I rise. Through this, the Epicurus, I can never pronounce that word, Epicurus, a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is repeated in immediate succession with no intervening words. Angelou's assertion of her rise is forceful and vehement. The assonance between I rise, I rise, I rise adds to a ringing and strident quality of the refrain. Each word of I rise is equally stressed in these lines as well, and this leaves no doubt who will rise in the power struggle between oppressed and oppressor. Despite all the oppressor's efforts to crush her in the dirt or harm, shoot, cut, kill, Angelou is one who will triumph. And this last paragraph that I've written is all about the central message and the meaning of the poem, whose very title is Still I Rise. By ending with a repetition of this message, the takeaway of the poem is clear. The speaker rises and will continue to rise above oppression and prejudice. Still has the meaning of despite in the title. Thus, despite whatever pain, terror or fear she experiences due to hatred and prejudice, the speaker remains defiant and empowered in the face of oppression. Ultimately, the phrase transforms from a global mantra for Angelou to a rallying cry for black people and more generally all oppressed and marginalised people. So actually it won't be of any surprise to hear that this poem is read during the peaceful protests in America and across the world right now. This Black Lives Matter has used this poem as an embodiment of the message that they're trying to give. Okay, so I've asked you to kind of write down or identify in your poem where we see politics, where we see history, oppression, societal issues, individual rights, slavery, peaceful protest. What I would like you to do now is write a couple of sentences just to finish up this lesson. What would you say is the most important theme in the poem? And why? Write down which one you think is the most important theme in the poem and why. Pause the video while you do that, please. Okay. Thank you very much for all of your work this lesson. It's been a lot of me talking, but hopefully you guys will have been engaged in this and see the link between the poem and what is happening in the United States right now. I wish you all a lovely day. You will hear me again very soon, where we're going to be looking at an extract from a novel based around these themes. Thank you very much, Year 9. Bye-bye.